Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. Last week I started a series that I'm going to carry here for a couple of weeks, maybe with a few other episodes interspersed between, about how to run the best session at your table, or at least a really good one, or at least a decent one, or pretty good one. And I talked about the idea of player engagement. Rarely do you have problems with GM engagement. It's often the players who get lost in things. So I talked about some of the things that I think are important regarding player engagement and some of the benefits of it. And then I also talked about some ideas. Now I'm going to revisit engagement with a couple of specific tactics or techniques, whatever you want to say. I might do that next week. But in this part 2, I promised as a teaser at the end of last week's episode, and if you haven't seen it, there is a link in the show notes to it. And on that topic of show notes, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, yada, yada, ring the bell, all that good stuff. Comment. I'd love to get in some conversations with folks about what you think about these things, these ideas that I'm putting to screen, that I've thought about over the years about how to make a session go well. But I left off with a teaser about something that I was going to talk about this week that I think you should leave out of your games. And I think I referred to it as being kind of cancerous. And here is the cancer you should leave out of your games: politics, real world politics. Now, before I get into why I think that is so important, I want to talk about politics in a way that you or the kind of politics you could inject into your game that could actually really enhance it and make it good. And that is political issues or political ideas within the story to a point. Okay, so the crooked ruler, the just, honest, but only moderately competent local sheriff, the mindless pencil-pushing bureaucrat who gets in the way of you conducting an investigation in an urban horror story. There are all kinds of places where you can take a lead, you can take ideas from real-world politics and use that to make your story feel familiar in a way that then players are able to interact with the story through their characters based on their own prior knowledge and ideas about those political issues. I mean, I think that if you look at fantasy games, obviously you have, if you want to just go with as we say, the bog standard fantasy of, milords and miladies and kings and nobles and aristocrats and knights and stuff like that. There's a lot of territory to inject political issues within the story that can enhance the story, add ripples and complications. I mean, what if you have, the local lord in, as we say, your just, utterly stereotypical fantasy world. The local lord is crooked, all right, but not horrible. Not someone the players or the characters would want to back up, but when the neighboring kingdom decides to attack or monsters come flowing out of the hills, like is their wont, that lord stands up and fights and leads and does well. So you're like, oh my golly. And then when the thing ends, goes back to being crooked. Or even during the war, whatever you want to call it, during that is, finding ways to skim off the top and profit for himself while still actually protecting his lands. That can be a way to inject some challenges for the players into the story that are of a political nature. So there are lots of places where you can use politics, even those informed by real history or real world events, to enhance your game and enhance the story. I do, however, think that there are limits to where you should go with that. Are you looking for opportunities to make your own real world political point through the game story? And And I think that's where you start to get on thin ice. And you know what I mean? We look, we've all taken, that coworker or the neighbor or family member who's obnoxious or, otherwise not entirely to our liking, and we lampoon that character. We've all done that, or you steal from literature, you steal from sources outside your mind, and you create, the buffoon of a character or the rake of a character, and everyone at the table might know, okay, that's what we're actually pointing toward, and it's kind of fun, or it increases the emotional charge, if you want to say that, for when dealing with this character, because you are activated in part by real world thoughts and emotions, which then animate the story at the table a little more. Again, though, I still think you start to get on thin ice there, because you potentially are trying to, or you could come across as trying to stroke your own vanity over your own real world political opinions based on who you include, how they are satired, or how you present them, or things like that. Like, I think that if you are trying to use a made-up world, the made-up story, with made-up characters, to somehow prove to yourself and others that your real-world political preferences and affinities are good, right, and true, you've lost something. You've lost focus on what the game is there for and what you can do with it. I had a player, this was a number of years ago, and it's still to this day, even thinking of it right now, there's a piece of me was like, I just don't get it. This individual is extremely political. And everything over time, everything became like this individual's politics wormed their way into everything this person did or talked about. And I remember having this conversation after a game session where this person took issue with some of the things that I, as a GM, had, some characters and character interrelations, and how this person didn't like that because it flew in the face of this person's real world politics. And I said, I didn't intend to do that. And second, like, this is all made up. And this was the money line that just hit me and still makes me, I don't even know what to think about this. This person said, but even made up things can be real. And it was this idea, this person went on to explain, it was this absolute firm belief that what you do in this made up world should represent what you believe should be in the real world. And therefore there was no dividing line between them. I mean, like, that's just, frankly, that's crazy. By virtue of something being made up, it can't be real. Okay, fictional things can't be real. Sorry. So there is a point where you take your real world politics and you worm them into the game, and you poison what the game can be, because then the real world politics, the fact that the game is this potentially community building and friendship enhancing and relationship enhancing escape or pastime, it becomes just yet another place for people to grind about politics. And that's where I say I think it's a cancer. I think you have to be very mindful and disciplined that you don't let that happen. So we've got two things going on right here. We have politics in games of a story focused and keeping within the story manner, and that's okay. We've got a blurry space where we move from the crooked ruler to I don't like the current president or governor or whatever, and your crooked ruler is a shabby facsimile that everyone recognizes is you harping on your sense or your current, real world political preferences. I think you start to lose the point of the game very quickly. And the trouble is that if you are playing, let's say you're sitting around a table with 4 or 5 friends, and maybe all of you share the same general political affinities and preferences. So you could say to yourself, well, who cares? What's the harm? I actually think to an extent there is a danger here, because you risk putting yourself in a position where you create a very safe and supportive feedback loop that just keeps telling you that you're right and that anyone who disagrees with you is wrong, bad, stupid, a bad actor, whatever. And I think that when you get accustomed to that, if you let your real world, if you take your real world and pour it into your made up world, and then you reinforce your real world self through your fantasy made up self, you're going to carry that back into the real world. You're not going to treat people as actual human beings. You're going to treat them as objects, not subjects, like I mentioned in last week's episode. If there's someone that everyone at your table, because you're friends with these people and you know one another, you know that everyone would get the joke. I still think that a degree of restraint is probably in everybody's best interest. Stroking your own ego again and again and again, it becomes habitual, and then thought and feeling for other people, and the fact that if you have a right to have your views the way you want them, then everyone else does too. And we have to live in this frothy, diverse world. And so the less able and less habituated you are to accepting other people and listening to them, I just don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good thing. Now, obviously, if you have a varied group, which sadly nowadays it seems like there is less and less of that. People self-select into groups that meet their political fancies. But if you're fortunate enough that that's not the case, that you come together as friends around this story at this table, and maybe you really don't know one another's politics. Boy, wouldn't that be lovely? Or you don't share one another's politics, but you don't really care because you're connecting over the game, not the real world. Injecting your real world political affinities into the story then is very off-putting, because you may be, you're just picking at a scab that's not worth picking. You're picking at something that's just not worth picking at. You are, if you have two or three people at a table who generally think one way about politics, and maybe one or two or three who think another way, you inject something into the game that could create a cleave, a fracture, a gap, and push into that space and make people uncomfortable and piss them off, maybe even rightfully, and you take away from the game. So two kinds of politics so far. One, safe and story enhancing. One, fraught with danger. The last one, absolutely cancerous. And this is the politicization, the political litmus test, the purity test that I see so much online, where like Wizards of the Coast has just, they haven't jumped the shark. Like they've jumped the ocean that the shark is in, getting rid of half orcs and half races and all this stuff. It's just like, what? Half orcs aren't real. They're not real. And gnolls, they're not real. And so using them as proxies and representations for your real world political affinities, but you're not even getting into the story at this point. You're waving this banner around, and you're saying effectively, if you agree with our real world views, you're welcome to play in our game. And if you're not, then F you. You're a bad person. I'm of two ways on this next piece, but I think it was like last month or something like that. There was a week long, everything on social media seems to be like a week long kerfuffle. People get all pissed off about something for like a week or two, and then they move on to the next thing, to be pissed off about. But a guy, one of the top guys at Paizo, I guess back in August of last year, had tweeted something about he'd heard a rumor that now Vice President J.D. Vance had played Pathfinder. And if that were true, he wishes he would send all his books back because he doesn't want a fascist or a Nazi playing. Like, are you freaking kidding me? Who gives a shit if he played your stupid game? Or any of these stupid games? Like, who cares? Why create this this brawny, off-putting gatekeeper vibe or demand. Like, if you don't agree with my politics, don't play my game. Like, that's ridiculous. Here is, again, what can these games do? They can stimulate your creativity. They can encourage you to read. Some will force you to do lots and lots of math. They may encourage you to write. I mean, how many of you are frustrated authors or like wannabe authors, or at some point you've had some dream of like, oh my gosh, I had all these ideas. I should write a book or a short story or something like that. You are being your creativity, your urge to create something that others might find valuable, or just might be an expression of like, I think humanity's need to tell stories, and talk about heroes and villains and things like that. I mean, these games are a wonderful, wonderful motivator of that. So there's that. There's a great potential. Yeah, but you're not allowed to write about these things. Oh, yes, the traditional Dungeons and Dragons is representative of colonizers, and oh my gosh, are you freaking? So now you can't write about those things. Well, you can't have these half races because they're racist or some crap like that. So now what you're doing is you're slamming down doors and saying you're not allowed to talk about these things in game. You're not allowed to write about these things. Your creativity will be hemmed in accordance with my socio-political views. What a way to drive people away, and it's just sad. Now, another great thing that gaming can do, forget about the creative side of things, brings people together. Games have done this for thousands of years. They bring individuals, a pair of people together over a chessboard or whatever. Groups of people around a table. I mean, sports do this. All kinds of, collective play, whether it's more intellectual or more physical or something like that. They bring people together. And here we have people now and social media just makes everything worse. We have people now who hold it up as a badge of honor that they want to drive people out of the hobby because their politics aren't good, right, and true. And mine are. Like, that is just ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? First off, if you believe that if you're a free speech absolutist, like I am, if you believe in rights of conscience, then you have to accept that everyone gets to have their own say. Everyone gets to have their own opinion. You can disagree with them, absolutely. But nobody is somehow, nobody has lesser access or claim to that natural right. And then there's that issue of subject versus object. We are all subjects. We are not objects. As individual human beings with agency, we are each a subject. As I said, not an object, not a thing for someone else to use to their own advantage and then discard or just use as they wish or treat as they wish in that respect. And when you accept that view of humanity and therefore of others, it really ought to change. Well, it has to. If you truly accept it, it will change your perspective on your views vis-a-vis other people. Because you recognize that everybody's running around with their own views. And you go, interesting. How do I work through that? Everyone else has a right to say this. And the hard thing is that, again, these games have terrific potential to bring people together. And if you really are one of these sorts who's like, I have to believe, everyone has to stand for Ukraine or whatever. I just pick that out of the ether because it's in the ether right now. Won't you attract more flies with sugar than salt? Instead of demanding that everyone virtue signal alongside you and sing the chorus you're singing, and you won't even have a conversation with them or let them sit at your table unless you already prove that you passed their test. Wouldn't it make more sense to say, come one, come all, and be open and winsome and inviting instead of being a dick? I mean, if you really are bent on like, I just believed, then wouldn't it make more sense to attract more people to your banner than drive them away? Or at least more people around your table so that you could, maybe wave a little version of your banner around and maybe some people be like, hey, that's kind of interesting. I'll talk to you about that. So politics. So here's my advice. Don't be a gatekeeper. Don't drive people away from your table because they don't share your politics. I don't even think real world politics need to come up. But I know that sounds shocking in 2025, that we wouldn't just like wear it on our sleeve and run around with, telling everyone exactly how we voted and what we think about every single little thing. It's possible to not do that. In fact, it's really refreshing to not do that. So I think you just keep the real world politics. And when I say by real world, I mean actual, like proper noun, actual peoples, actual events. You keep that stuff out of your game, and you don't use it as a shield to keep people away, nor do you use it as a magnet to draw in people who will stroke your vanity. And then you get to stroke theirs, and everyone is sitting around stroking one another and feeling good about themselves. It's really actually not about the politics or the cause. It's just about you feeling good about yourself, which is really narcissistic. So keep the real world stuff out. Now, drawing themes from even current events, drawing ideas from history, even using real world characters as loose like frameworks or wireframes for your stories. I think that's fine, but I think it's always important to stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? If I want to have a big a country that is larger, a land that is larger and is known for being like brutish and not very nice to its neighbors, invade another country. Sounds familiar. Like, is that doable in your game world? Sure. But again, how far do you go in injecting your real world views on the model you used into the fictionalized version? I think that's where you should be careful. And it's not only for the other people at your table, it's for the people that you may well have driven away from your table. And I think it's also for yourself to not trap yourself unintentionally in a place where you seek ways in everything you do to tell yourself that you are good, right, and true. And anyone who disagrees with you is bad and wrong and stupid. I don't think that's ever a good way to manage yourself and manage relations with other people. So there you go. Politics. The funny thing is, a couple of weeks ago, over a period of weeks, I actually recorded something along these lines, like on two, 3 different occasions. And I kept looking at it and be like, this is trash. I'm going to get rid of it. Today, I'm not. I'm actually going to put it out there. So I'm genuinely interested in what you think about this. How do you handle the introduction of, or the presence of politics within the fictional world, politics of the fictional world? Do you, and to what extent, if you do you draw from real world and historical models or examples to give you ideas? And how do you deal? Of course, my advice is just don't. How do you deal with the real world stuff that circulates around these games and the human relations that are so connected to them? Really interested in knowing. So again, like and subscribe. Tell me what you think. And next week, I will talk some techniques about engagement, because it's not just the idea and a couple of big picture things. There are specific techniques, or as I said, tactics you can employ to stay more engaged as either a player or a GM. Thank you for listening, and have a great day. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.